My parents renovated with my loan, then said, "This is ours now. Pay rent or go." I foreclosed quietly, arriving with movers to claim what was legally mine amid their shocked protests. I, 32 never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to foreclose on their own parents. The idea would have seemed insane to me 3 years ago. But here's the thing about trust. Once it's shattered, you see everything differently. What I thought was helping family turned into the most expensive lesson of my life, and the only way to get justice was to play the long game. My parents always struggled with money. Dad worked construction until his back gave out when I was in college, and Mom bounced between retail jobs that never quite paid enough. Growing up, I watched them stress over every bill, every unexpected expense. I promised myself I'd do better, work harder, make something of myself so I could help them when the time came. I kept that promise. I got into software engineering, landed a solid job at a tech company, and by 30, I was making good money. Not Silicon Valley rich, but comfortable enough to save aggressively and think about my future. I bought a small house in a decent neighborhood as an investment property, planning to rent it out while I lived in my apartment closer to work. The mortgage was manageable, and the rental income would have covered most of it. Then Dad called me one evening about 2.5 years ago. His voice had that heavy quality it got when he was about to ask for something he hated asking for. He explained that their landlord was selling the property they'd rented for 15 years, and they had 60 days to find a new place. The rental market had exploded in our city, and everything they could afford was either a dump or in a dangerous area. Mom had been crying for days, he said, terrified they'd end up homeless. I suggested they move into my rental property. The mortgage was $1,600 a month, but I told them they could pay me $1,200, just enough to cover most of it while giving them a break. Dad went quiet for a long moment, then asked if there was any way they could buy it from me eventually. He said they were tired of renting, tired of building equity for someone else, tired of never having something that was truly theirs. I understood that feeling. I really did. So I made what I thought was a generous offer. I told them they could move and rent free for now, and we'd work out a sale agreement where they'd buy the house from me over time. I'd essentially hold the mortgage privately. They'd make payments directly to me, and once it was paid off, the house would be theirs. We'd do it all legally, with proper documentation. I'd even give them a family discount on the sale price, $240,000 instead of the $270 it was worth. Dad actually cried. Mom got on the phone and told me I was saving their lives, that they'd finally have security, that they could make it their forever home. I felt like I was doing something right, using my success to lift up the people who'd sacrificed for me my whole childhood. We met with a real estate attorney I hired and paid for. We drew up a private mortgage agreement where they'd pay me $1,800 a month for 15 years. It was more than the $1,200 I'd initially suggested for rent, but Dad insisted he wanted to pay fair market value for a mortgage, wanted to do this right. The agreement was clear. I retained legal ownership until the loan was paid in full, at which point the deed would transfer to them. If they defaulted, I had the right to foreclose. Standard stuff. Everyone signed. Everyone seemed happy. They moved in that October. For the first 6 months, everything was fine. They paid on time, sent me photos of how they were settling in, how Mom had planted flowers in the front garden. Dad texted me about fixing a loose board on the deck, asked if I minded him doing small repairs. I told him to go ahead, that taking care of the place was part of the deal. Then one Sunday, I drove over to drop off some mail that had been forwarded to my address. When I pulled up, I barely recognized the house. There was a massive dumpster in the driveway, and construction materials were scattered across the lawn. The front door had been replaced with an expensive-looking solid wood one with decorative glass panels. Through the windows, I could see the walls had been painted, and there were new light fixtures hanging where the old ones used to be. I found Dad in the backyard, overseeing 2 workers who were building a large deck extension. When he saw me, he grinned and waved me over, excited to show off the renovations. He walked me through everything they'd done, knocked down the wall between the kitchen and dining room to create an open concept, installed granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, replaced all the flooring with engineered hardwood, upgraded both bathrooms with new tile and fixtures, and now this deck project. He estimated they'd put $70,000 into renovations so far. $70,000. I asked him how they'd afforded all this. They could barely scrape together the down payment equivalent I'd asked for, and now they were dropping renovation money like they'd won the lottery. Dad's expression shifted slightly, became a bit defensive. He said they'd been saving, that Mom's sister had left her some money when she passed, and that they'd taken out a small personal loan for the rest. He said they wanted to make the house perfect, wanted it to feel like theirs, wanted to invest in their future. Something felt off, but I didn't push it. I reminded him that major renovations should have been discussed with me first since I still legally owned the property, but I didn't make a huge deal out of it. The improvements were increasing the property value. After all, even if the approach seemed reckless given their financial history. The payments continued for another 3 months. Then they started coming late. First by a few days, then by a week, then by 2 weeks. I'd text Dad when the payment was overdue, and he'd apologize and promise it was coming, that they'd had unexpected expenses. The money would eventually show up, but the pattern was concerning. By month 14, the payment was 3 weeks late. I drove over to talk to them in person. When I arrived, there was a brand new SUV in the driveway, one of those expensive models that runs about $50,000. I sat in my car for a moment, staring at it, feeling my stomach turn. Mom answered the door. She seemed surprised to see me, almost annoyed. I asked about the late payment, and she waved her hand dismissively and said they'd get it to me soon, that I needed to be patient. I asked about the new car, and she said it was none of my business, that Dad needed reliable transportation. I pointed out that reliable transportation could be found for a lot less than 50 grand, especially when they were behind on their house payment. That's when her demeanor changed completely. She told me I was being ungrateful, that after everything they'd done for me growing up, I should be happy to help them now. She said the house was going to be theirs anyway, so what did it matter if they were a few weeks late here and there? She said I was acting like a greedy landlord instead of their son. I kept my cool. I told her the agreement was clear, that consistent late payments were a problem, and that I needed them to prioritize the mortgage over luxury purchases. She told me to leave, said I was stressing her out, and she didn't need this. The payment came 4 days later, but something had fundamentally shifted. I started reviewing the mortgage agreement more carefully, started documenting every late payment, started keeping records of our conversations. 2 months later, the payment didn't come at all. I waited a week, then 2, then 3. I called, texted, and got no responses. Finally, I drove over on a Saturday morning. Both vehicles were there, so I knew they were home. I knocked for 5 minutes before Dad finally opened the door. He looked annoyed. Before I could say anything, he told me we needed to have a serious conversation and invited me in with the tone of someone about to deliver bad news to me, not someone who owed me money. We sat in their renovated living room, my living room, technically, and Dad laid it out. They'd talked to a lawyer, he said. They'd invested over $80,000 into the property now, which meant they had significant equity stake beyond just their mortgage payments. Their lawyer told them that given their investment and the fact that they'd been living there and making improvements, they had a strong case to claim ownership regardless of what our agreement said. I asked him what exactly he was saying. He said they weren't going to make any more payments. The house was theirs now, they'd earned it through their investment, and if I had a problem with it, I could take them to court. But their lawyer said any judge would see that forcing them out after they'd put so much money and effort into the place would be unjust. Mom chimed in from the kitchen, her voice sharp. She said I should be ashamed of myself for trying to profit off my own parents, that the house was their home now, and I had no right to it anymore. She said if I wanted to stay in their lives, I needed to accept reality and move on. I sat there for a moment, processing. Then I asked if they were seriously refusing to honor the legal agreement we'd all signed. Dad said the agreement was unfair and had been from the start, that I'd taken advantage of their desperation. He said I could afford to lose one house, but they couldn't afford to lose their home. I stood up and left without another word. The next morning, I called the real estate attorney who drafted our original agreement. I explained the situation, provided all my documentation of late payments and our recent conversation, and asked what my options were. He was blunt. I had every legal right to foreclose. They'd defaulted on the agreement, and their renovations didn't give them any ownership claim. The property was still in my name, and if they wouldn't honor the contract, I could force the issue. I asked how long the process would take. He said given their default and refusal to pay, probably 4 to 6 months if they didn't contest it, potentially longer if they fought. I told him to start the process, but to do it quietly. I didn't want them to know until the papers were served. They got served 3 weeks later. Dad called me immediately, furious, saying I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I was destroying our family over money. I told him he'd destroyed our agreement by refusing to honor it, that he'd lied to me about his intentions, and that he'd made his choice. He said I'd regret this, then hung up. Mom sent me a long text about what a disappointment I was, how I'd turned into someone she didn't recognize, how money had corrupted me. I didn't respond. They hired a lawyer and contested the foreclosure, just as I'd expected. Their argument was exactly what Dad had said, that their substantial investment in renovations gave them an equity stake that superseded our agreement. My attorney tore that argument apart. The contract was clear, they defaulted, and improvements made to a property you don't own don't grant you ownership. It's like renovating a rental and expecting the landlord to give you the house. The process dragged on for 5 months. During that time, they stopped all communication with me except through lawyers. They posted on social media about their horrible son who was trying to steal their home, painting themselves as victims. Some relatives reached out to tell me I was wrong, that family should forgive, that I was being cruel. A few who knew the full story quietly supported me. I didn't engage with any of it. I just waited. The judgment came through on a cold morning in March. The foreclosure was approved. They had 30 days to vacate. My attorney handled serving them the notice. Dad called me one last time. His voice was different now, smaller, desperate. He asked if there was any way to fix this, said they'd start making payments again, said they'd been stupid and prideful. I asked if he'd actually been able to make the payments this whole time, or if the money genuinely wasn't there. He went quiet, then admitted they'd been spending money on other things, that they'd thought I wouldn't actually follow through, that they'd gambled and lost. I told him the time to fix it had been 6 months ago when he decided to stop paying me and claim the house as his own. I said I'd offered him a fair deal, charged him below market, helped him when he needed it, and he'd responded by trying to steal from me. He said some things can't be forgiven, and apparently, some things can't be undone either. Then I hung up. I spent the next 30 days preparing. I arranged for a moving company, got a storage unit for their belongings, made sure everything was documented. My attorney advised me that I needed to handle their possessions carefully to avoid any claims of illegal eviction or property damage. On the morning of the 31st day, I showed up at the house with the movers, my attorney, and a sheriff's deputy. The deputy was there to ensure the eviction proceeded peacefully and legally. The movers were there to remove any remaining belongings. Dad's truck was in the driveway, and I could see both of them through the front window. When we approached, Mom opened the door before we could knock. Her face was red and puffy like she'd been crying for days. Dad stood behind her, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Mom started yelling immediately. She said I couldn't do this, that this was their home, that I was destroying them. Dad told her to stop, his voice hollow. He knew it was over. The deputy explained that they needed to leave the premises immediately. Any belongings left behind would be moved to the storage unit I'd arranged, and they'd have 30 days to collect everything. After that, anything remaining would be disposed of. Mom turned to me then, and the look on her face was something I'll never forget. Pure hatred mixed with disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend how her own son could do this to her. She asked me if I felt good about myself, if this was worth it, if I could live with what I was doing. I told her I could live with enforcing a legal agreement she'd voluntarily signed. What I couldn't live with was being stolen from by my own parents and pretending it was okay because we shared blood. Dad finally spoke up. He said they had nowhere to go, that they'd burned through their savings on the renovations and the legal fight, that they were going to end up in some terrible apartment or worse. I felt something twist in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I told him that was a consequence of his choices, not mine. He'd had a stable, below-market mortgage on a house that would have been his in 15 years. He'd chosen to gamble that away. They gathered some personal items, clothes, photos, a few small things. Mom was sobbing now, stumbling from room to room like she was in shock. Dad moved mechanically, his face blank. The movers started bringing out furniture, boxing up kitchen items, dismantling their bedroom set. It took 4 hours to clear the house. I stayed the entire time, partly to oversee everything, partly because I felt like I owed it to myself to see this through completely. Every piece of furniture that came out, every box that was loaded, was a reminder of what they'd chosen to throw away. When it was finally empty, the deputy confirmed they'd vacated and that possession had been transferred to me. My parents stood on the lawn next to their loaded SUV, the one they'd bought instead of paying their mortgage, and just stared at the house. Their house, they kept calling it. My house, as the deed had always stated. Dad looked at me one last time. He didn't say anything, just looked at me like he was trying to memorize my face, or maybe like he was seeing a stranger. Then they got in the SUV and drove away. Update 1. It's been 4 months since the foreclosure. I thought I should update because some people reached out asking what happened next, and honestly, writing this out has been therapeutic in a strange way. I had the house professionally cleaned and assessed. The renovations they'd done actually were high quality. The contractor they'd hired hadn't cut corners. The property value had increased to about $330,000 thanks to their improvements. I listed it for sale immediately. I had no intention of keeping it, no desire to live there or rent it out. Too many complicated feelings attached to it now. It sold in 2 weeks for $325,000. After paying off the original mortgage I still carried, the real estate fees, and the legal costs from the foreclosure, I netted about $115,000. That money went straight into investments. I considered it the most expensive education I'd ever received about trust and family dynamics. My parents moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. I know this because my aunt, Mom's younger sister, reached out to me about a month after the eviction. She was one of the few family members who'd known the full story from the beginning and had quietly supported my decision. She told me my parents were struggling. Dad had picked up some under-the-table handyman work despite his bad back, but it wasn't consistent. Mom was working retail again, miserable and exhausted. They were barely making rent. The financial cushion they'd burned through on renovations and legal fees was gone, and they were living paycheck to paycheck again, just like before, except now they were older and more bitter. My aunt said Mom had stopped talking about me entirely, wouldn't even acknowledge having a son. Dad mentioned me once, she said, late one night after a few beers. He'd said he'd made a calculated bet that I wouldn't have the spine to follow through, that family loyalty would override everything else. He'd been wrong, and now he had to live with being wrong. Part of me felt vindicated hearing that. A larger part felt hollow. I haven't spoken to either of them since that day with the movers. They haven't tried to contact me either. No apologies, no attempts at reconciliation, nothing. It's like we've mutually agreed to pretend the other doesn't exist. The extended family situation has been messy. Thanksgiving was awkward. I got invited to my aunt's house, but obviously my parents weren't there. She'd invited them too, but Mom had refused to come if there was any chance I'd be there. So the family split, in a way. Some people chose sides. Some people tried to stay neutral. Some people just stopped coming to family events altogether because the drama was too much. My cousin asked me at Christmas if I thought it was worth it. If having that $115,000 and being proven right was worth losing my parents. I told her the truth. I didn't lose my parents over money. I lost them the moment they decided to steal from me and felt entitled to do it. The foreclosure was just the legal documentation of a relationship that had already died. I've been in therapy. That's not something I would have admitted 6 months ago, but this whole situation made me realize I needed to process some things. Mainly about trust, about how the people you think will never hurt you can hurt you the worst, about how love and family don't mean the same thing as loyalty or honesty. My therapist asked me once if I regretted my decision. I said no, and I meant it. But she pushed me. Did I regret how things ended up? And that's different, isn't it? I don't regret enforcing my rights and refusing to be stolen from. But I regret that it came to that. I regret that my parents were the kind of people who would do what they did. I regret that I had to learn that lesson about them. Financially, I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. That $115,000, combined with my regular savings and investments, put me in a position to buy a better property for myself. I closed on a nice condo last month, and I'm settling in. No plans to loan money to family ever again, obviously. Emotionally, it's complicated. Some days I feel completely at peace with everything. I did the right thing, protected myself, refused to be a doormat. Other days, I wonder what they're doing, if they're okay, if Dad's back is holding up, if Mom's knees are hurting from standing all day at work. Then I remember how they looked at me, how they tried to justify stealing from me, and the sympathy evaporates. Someone on a forum where I'd vented about this situation told me that sometimes the cost of enforcing boundaries is the relationship itself, and you have to decide if the boundary is worth more than the relationship. In this case, it was. The boundary was my right not to be stolen from by my own parents. And if they couldn't respect that, then what kind of relationship did we really have? I don't know if they'll ever reach out. Part of me hopes they don't. Another part of me wonders what I'd even say if they did. The trust is gone, completely shattered. You can't rebuild from that, can you? Or maybe you can, but it would be building something new and different, not reconstructing what was there before. For now, I'm moving forward. I'm focused on my career, my own life, my own future. I learned that blood doesn't entitle people to exploit you, that helping someone doesn't mean letting them take advantage, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to enforce consequences when people cross your lines. The house is someone else's now. A young family bought it, excited about the renovations, the open floor plan, the nice deck. They have no idea about the history, about what those granite countertops and hardwood floors cost beyond money. That's probably for the best. As for my parents, they made their choice, and I made mine. Maybe someday enough time will pass that we can have some kind of relationship again, though I can't imagine what that would look like. More likely, this is just how things are now. Two people who used to be my parents, living across town, and me, their son who learned that sometimes protecting yourself means walking away from people you thought you'd never have to walk away from. That's where things stand. Not a happy ending, not exactly a sad one either. Just real life. Messy and complicated and final in ways I didn't expect when I first offered to help them out of kindness. But I'd rather be here, alone and secure, than where they are, together but drowning, having burned every bridge to keep warm for one winter. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that helping someone should never mean destroying yourself, and family should never mean accepting theft with a smile. I wish I'd learned that lesson cheaper, but at least I learned it, and I'll never forget it. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.